It was a dark and rainy night. Rain kept falling hard on the tin roof of a small dirty bar beside the road. The sound was like someone drumming slowly, but never stopping. Inside the bar, the air was smoky. It smelled of old whiskey, old leather, and nights that ended with fights, not smiles. In one corner, a jukebox was playing a slow, sad blues song. It sounded tired, like it had been playing the same song for years. This place was called the Rusted Chain. It was not the kind of place you came to if you wanted peace. It was the kind of place where trouble liked to sit down and stay a while. That night, a group of bikers had been there for hours. They were big, loud, and rough. They banged pool balls hard on the tables. They laughed at rude jokes. They shouted for more beer. Their voices filled the room like thunder. Most of the people in the bar knew what to do when bikers were there. You kept your head down. You drank your drink quietly. You didn't look at them. You hoped they would leave without noticing you. Then the bar's old wooden door opened. It creaked loudly. The cold wind rushed in, bringing a chill into the smoky air. Some people looked toward the door, but only for a second. In a place like this, every sound mattered. It could mean nothing. It could mean danger. A tall man walked in. His hair was long and tied back in a simple ponytail. He wore a heavy, worn leather coat. His boots looked old and dusty, like they had walked for years. He didn't walk like most people. He didn't swagger or try to look tough. He didn't glance around to see who was in the room. He just walked slowly, calmly, like he'd been in many bars like this before. Like nothing here could surprise him. He went to a table by the window. He pulled out a chair slowly, without hurrying. He took off his coat and put it on the back of the chair. He told the bartender, in a calm voice, "Bourbon. Neat." He sat down, holding his glass in both big hands. For a moment, it felt like the storm outside was easier to watch than the noisy room inside. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody thought he was special. He just looked like another traveler passing through. Maybe a little older than most. Maybe a little too calm for a place like this. But sometimes, quiet people make the most noise without saying a word. At another table sat a man named Razor Cane. He was the leader of the biker crew. He liked being the center of attention. He had tattoos of flames crawling up his arms. His neck was thick like a metal piston. His head was shaved. When Razor Cane talked or laughed, the whole group got louder. Razor Cane noticed the calm man by the window. He didn't like it. He didn't like strangers who didn't follow his rules. He didn't like anyone who came into his place and acted like they belonged. Razor Cane tapped his beer glass twice on the table. His crew knew that signal. "Go check him out," Razor Cane said in a low voice, but not low enough that people couldn't hear. One of the bikers leaned back in his chair. He grinned. "Looks like some tired guitar guy who took the wrong turn," he said. Another laughed. "Or maybe a janitor who forgot to shave." The man by the window didn't look at them. He took a slow sip from his glass. His eyes stayed on the storm outside. Somehow, that made Razor Cane angrier. The man wasn't even giving him the respect of looking at him. It was like the stranger was saying, "You don't matter to me." Razor Cane stood up. He did it slowly, like he wanted everyone to watch. The bar got a little quieter. People knew this kind of scene. It usually ended with blood. Razor Cane called out, loud and sharp, "Hey, you sit at my table, old man, you better tip your hat." His crew laughed hard. Some people at other tables chuckled nervously, but the man by the window didn't move. He put his glass down gently. He picked up a napkin. He wiped a small wet ring from the table where the glass had been. He acted like nothing else in the room existed. That was worse than insulting Razor Cane. That was saying, "You're not worth my time." One of Razor Cane's men, a huge man with a messy beard, picked up a pint of beer. He walked past the stranger's table, pretending to trip. Beer spilled all over the stranger's arms and lap. "Oh, sorry, old man," the biker said with fake innocence. "Guess your fancy drink wanted some company." The bikers roared with laughter. The stranger didn't move fast. He didn't shout. He took the same napkin and slowly wiped his arms dry. He dabbed the table dry, too. His face didn't change at all. The big biker looked confused. "What's with this guy?" he mumbled as he backed away. Razor Cane's boots thudded on the floor as he walked closer. He leaned over the table. His breath smelled like cheap beer. He kicked the stranger's chair so hard the bourbon almost spilled. "You hear me talking, old man," he growled. The stranger finally looked up. His eyes were calm and deep, like a river that doesn't care about storms on the surface. "I hear you," he said in a low, even voice. "Just didn't think you were saying anything important." The bikers stopped laughing for a second. The regulars froze. The room felt heavy. Razor Cane's grin got smaller. That calm voice had cut deeper than a shout ever could. He leaned even closer and whispered, "You know what happens to ghosts like you? The kind who think they can't be touched, until they get stepped on." The stranger didn't move. He didn't blink. Lightning flashed outside. Thunder shook the glass. For the first time that night, Razor Cane felt a tiny bit of doubt. Still, the stranger just sat there, giving him one last chance to back down. The silence stretched. Even the jukebox seemed quieter. Two regulars in the corner pushed their drinks away and leaned back, trying to stay out of sight. The bartender cleaned a glass that was already spotless, pretending to be busy. Razor Cane's smile didn't feel steady anymore. He looked at his crew, wanting their laughter to make him feel strong again. "What are you all staring at?" he barked. "He thinks he's better than us." The laughter came, but it was thin and weak now. One younger biker, a big man with a thick beard and little sense, slammed his hand on the table. "I'll shut him up," he said. He grabbed a half-empty bottle and walked toward the stranger. His boots hit the floor in a steady beat, like a drum. He lifted the bottle, swinging it close to the man's head, not to hit, but to scare him. The stranger moved in the same instant. He stood up, smooth as water flowing. One big hand caught the biker's wrist. He twisted it sideways. The bottle slipped out and clattered onto the floor. The biker's knees bent. His balance was gone. He gasped, more surprised than hurt. In a single motion, the stranger turned his weight, guiding the biker's arm down. The biker hit the floor face first with a loud thud. The stranger didn't punch. He didn't kick. He just let go. The biker groaned, holding his arm, too shocked to get up. The stranger bent down only long enough to pick up his coat from the chair. He shook the dust off it gently, like brushing crumbs off a table. Then he set it back on the chair. The bar went silent. The storm outside was loud. The wind howled. Rain hit the windows hard. Inside the bar, it was very quiet. You could only hear the storm and the short, quick breaths of a young boy lying on the floor. Razor Cane's jaw moved side to side. His eyes were big and full of anger. But behind the anger, there was something else. It was doubt, the kind of feeling a man like him never wanted anyone to see. "You son of a," Razor Cane shouted. His voice was sharp. Then suddenly, he grabbed the bourbon glass from the table. He threw it hard at the bar. The glass hit behind the counter and broke into many pieces. The bartender ducked quickly so he wouldn't get hit. He swore under his breath. The stranger stood up straighter. His body looked relaxed, but his eyes were sharp and fixed on Razor Cane. Razor Cane kicked a coat that was hanging on the back of a chair. He threw it to the floor and pressed his boot down on it like he was trying to put out a fire. "Let's see how calm you are now, tough guy," Razor Cane said. Still, the stranger said nothing. His eyes never moved away from Razor Cane's face. He bent down, picked up the coat, brushed off the dirt, and placed it back on the chair. "You done?" the stranger asked. His voice was calm and smooth, like a knife cutting through cloth. "Done." Razor Cane laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. It was sharp and nervous. "I'm just getting started," he said. Razor Cane pulled his arm back. It was the kind of movement you make before throwing a huge punch, the kind meant to scare everyone in the room. The stranger stood up fully now. He was tall and steady. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't take a fighting pose. He just stood there, his shoulders square, eyes calm, waiting for the punch. That calm made Razor Cane pause for half a second. The pause was a mistake. The punch came anyway, but the stranger moved fast, smooth like water. He stepped to the side, caught Razor Cane's wrist in midair, and twisted it down. In one clean move, Razor Cane's own speed pulled him forward. The stranger turned his hips, shifted his weight, and thud. Razor Cane's back hit the dirty floor hard. The sound shook the glasses on the bar. Everyone in the room gasped. The stranger didn't kick him while he was down. He didn't hit him again. He let go of Razor Cane's arm and stepped back. If Razor Cane wanted to get up, he could do it himself. The stranger pulled out his chair again and sat. "Jesus," one of the regulars whispered. Razor Cane lay on the floor for a moment, breathing hard. His face showed humiliation and shock. He had been taken down quickly with no wasted moves. Some of the bikers shifted uncomfortably. One muttered, "He didn't even break a sweat." But Razor Cane's crew wasn't finished. Anger can make people act without thinking, and humiliation can burn hotter than whiskey. Two of Razor Cane's men stood up from their table. Their chairs scraped loudly across the floor. "Let's put him down," one of them growled, rolling his shoulders, ready to fight. The stranger didn't even look at them. His hands rested lightly on the back of his chair. The calm in his stillness was scarier than fists. The two men stepped forward. A third man started to rise. The whole group looked ready to jump in and start a fight they thought they wanted. Then the door slammed open. The rusted chain hanging near the door stopped rattling. It was suddenly too quiet. A biker bar is usually full of noise, laughter, clinking glasses, the sound of pool balls hitting each other, boots scraping on dirty tile. But after the stranger dropped Razor Cane with just a twist of the wrist, it felt like even the air had stopped moving. People didn't know if they had just seen a trick or a miracle. Nobody wanted to find out which. Razor Cane stayed on the floor longer than he should have. His face was red from more than just pain. His pride was leaking away faster than air from a popped tire. His men shifted in their seats. Some looked ready to join the fight. Others stared at the stranger, hoping to see some weakness Razor Cane had missed. Then the door slammed again. It wasn't the storm outside that made everyone turn their heads. It was the sound, sharp and heavy, like a gunshot starting a race you weren't ready for. A cold wind blew inside. Napkins flew across the floor. The blinds on the window rattled. A man stepped inside. The rusty chain above the door stopped moving. He wasn't wearing leather like the bikers. He wasn't covered in shiny metal or chains. He wore a faded denim shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, and boots that hit the floor in a steady rhythm. He didn't need to make noise. He didn't need to show off. He walked with a weight that made the whole bar pay attention. Nobody said his name out loud. Nobody had to. Chuck Norris. A few men near the pool table froze. One dropped his pool cue without noticing. The bartender's mouth opened like he wanted to speak, but no words came out. Even the storm outside seemed quiet, as if it knew not to compete. Chuck's eyes moved slowly around the room. They were calm but sharp, like they could cut through smoke. When his eyes found the tall stranger by the window, something passed between them. It wasn't words or hand signals. It was something else, recognition. Chuck walked straight toward him. The crowd stepped aside without being told. When Chuck reached the table, the two men looked at each other. Chuck gave a small nod, and the hint of a smile appeared on his face. "Steven," Chuck said. His voice was low and sure, like a man who didn't waste words. "I know you don't need me here, but I wanted to see how far these boys were willing to push their luck." Steven Seagal didn't rush his answer. He let the silence hang for a moment. Then he gave a tiny grin. "They're trying real hard, Chuck," Steven said. Everyone in the bar could feel the respect between them. This was more than just two men meeting in a bar. It was a history deeper than these bikers could understand. These were two men who had faced many storms and never bent. The room felt smaller now, like the walls had moved in. The bikers, who had been loud before, stayed quiet. But Razor Cane wasn't ready to give up. His pride wouldn't let him. He pushed himself to his feet, breathing hard. His face twisted with anger and madness. "You've got to be kidding me," Razor Cane spat. His voice was sharp enough to cut the silence. "Chuck Norris. Steven Seagal. What is this, open mic night for washed-up movie stars?" He laughed, but it was an ugly, fake laugh. "What's next? You two gonna sign autographs and show us your fake karate moves? Maybe do a slow-motion spin for the fans?" Some of his men laughed with him, but it was nervous laughter, the kind you do when you're afraid not to. Chuck turned his head slowly, like the sun rising. His eyes locked on Razor Cane. There was no anger, no rush, Just steady, quiet steel. The man you've been pushing around all night, Chuck said, his voice carrying easily, gave you every chance to walk away. He's shown you patience. He's shown you restraint, more than you deserved. I'm not that patient. Nobody breathed. Steven stayed quiet, his coat neatly folded over the back of his chair. His eyes were calm, like he knew this moment was coming. He didn't need to speak. Chuck had already changed the whole room. Razor Kane's lip curled. He stepped closer, fists tight, his boots heavy on the old tile. You think I'm scared of you too, he snarled. You're just actors. Pretenders. Nothing but smoke and lights. Out here, it's real. The words hung in the air like poison. The bikers looked at each other with wide eyes. They knew Razor Kane had just gone too far. Chuck didn't move. Not yet. He let Razor Kane dig himself deeper into trouble. His calm was scarier than any shouting could be. The moment stretched on. Outside, the storm cracked again, thunder shaking the windows. Then Razor Kane broke the silence. He roared and charged forward, fists swinging wildly, hoping to overwhelm Chuck. The bar froze. Chuck didn't back away. He stepped forward instead. His hips turned smoothly, like he'd done this 1,000 times. His boot came up fast and clean. The kick hit Razor Kane square in the chest. The sound wasn't a crack or a boom. It was sharper, like the air itself splitting in two. Razor Kane's whole body went up off the floor. His arms waved all over the place as he flew backward through the air. He hit a table so hard that the table flipped over. Bottles and glasses smashed on the floor, making loud crash sounds. Razor Kane landed in a messy pile, groaning and holding his ribs. He could barely breathe. The fight was gone from him before he even knew what happened. Nobody moved. Chuck slowly put his leg down, breathing out like he had just finished tying his shoes. He looked around the room with eyes that said, "Don't try it." He didn't have to yell. He didn't have to wave his arms. His look was enough. Chuck was the kind of man who stayed calm because he was a good guy. He tipped his head toward Steven. Steven said, "Me? I'd just like to finish things quicker." Nobody laughed. Nobody even moved. Even the jukebox stopped playing music. Steven pulled his coat a little straighter and looked at Chuck. "Quiet but clear," Steven said. "Thanks for the punctuation." Chuck gave a small laugh, deep and warm. "Always happy to help," he said. They stood side by side for a moment, not needing to talk. The two men filled the room just by standing there. Their quiet was louder than shouting. But the bikers weren't ready to give up. One of Razor Kane's friends slammed his fist on the table. "Forget this," he yelled. "Let's take them." Chairs scraped loudly across the floor. 6 men jumped up and moved forward. The rest yelled and shouted to make themselves feel braver. Steven didn't move until the first man swung at him. The biker's punch was big and wild. Steven moved aside, quick as lightning. He grabbed the man's wrist. Steven turned his hips, and the man fell to the floor with a loud grunt, hurting himself worse than any punch could. Another man came from the side, throwing a bottle. Steven caught his arm and spun him into his friend. Both men crashed to the floor, groaning. 2 more ran at Chuck. Chuck didn't say anything. One sharp kick made the first man drop. A hard elbow made the second man bend over the table in pain. Then a third man ran at Chuck from behind with a broken pool stick. Chuck spun around, grabbed the man's wrist, and smashed it against the wood. The stick fell to the ground with a clatter. Now the bar was full of noise. Boots stomped. Fists swung. People shouted. But Steven and Chuck didn't fight like wild men. They moved with calm and control. Every move was sharp and clean. Every hit stopped exactly where it needed to. A huge biker tried to grab Steven from behind in a big bear hug. Steven dropped his weight, spun, and threw the man over his shoulder. The man smashed onto a table, so hard the table broke in two. Another man charged low at Chuck. Chuck met him with a knee to the stomach. The man dropped to the floor gasping for air. Chuck turned and kicked a chair into the next biker's path. The biker tripped and fell flat. Chuck calmly stepped forward and pinned him down with one foot. In just a few minutes, the bikers who had ruled the rusted chain bar for years were all on the floor, groaning, holding their ribs, or trying and failing to stand up. The regular customers just stared in shock. They were too scared to cheer. But Razor Cane wasn't done yet. His pride was burning hotter than the pain in his body. He pushed himself up, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. His eyes darted around the room until they found the knife in his boot. With a snarl, he yanked it out. The steel blade glimmered in the dim light as he raised it high. "You think you can humiliate me?" he shouted. His voice shook with rage. "You won't walk out of here alive." Steven's calm eyes locked on him. "Don't do it," Steven said in a low voice that cut through the room like a warning bell. But Razor Cane wasn't listening. He lunged forward. The knife flashed in the weak neon glow. Some people gasped and ducked under tables. For a second, it looked like the fight would turn bloody. But Steven moved first. His hand shot up and grabbed Razor Cane's wrist in mid-swing. The blade stopped just inches from Steven's chest. With a twist and a pivot, Steven turned the knife arm back toward Razor Cane. Razor Cane screamed, his knees bending as pain shot through his shoulder. "Drop it," Steven said, calm but firm. Razor Cane's pride kept him holding on to the knife. His teeth clenched. His eyes blazed. That's when Chuck stepped in. He didn't bother with words. He stepped beside Steven and kicked Razor Cane hard in the middle. The air whooshed out of Razor Cane. His grip on the knife broke, and it clattered to the floor. Steven let go of his wrist, and Razor Cane fell backward, groaning. The knife slid across the floor to the bartender's boots. The bartender kicked it away quickly, his face pale. Razor Cane tried to push himself up again. But Chuck pressed his boot against Razor Cane's chest, holding him down easily. "You had your chance," Chuck said, low but clear. "He gave you more mercy than you deserve." Steven adjusted his coat sleeve. "And you wasted it," he said. The bar was silent except for Razor Cane's ragged breathing. His crew, beaten and bruised, didn't move. None of them wanted to meet Chuck's eyes. Chuck lifted his boot, letting Razor Cane fall back to the floor. Steven gave Razor Cane a final look, not angry, not pitying, just heavy with disappointment. Then he turned toward the door and began to walk. Chuck followed. The crowd parted for them like water. No one tried to stop them. No one said a word. The rusted chain bar had a new story now. One that would be told for years. The night Razor Cane and his gang learned there are storms you don't try to fight. Chuck spoke to the room without raising his voice. "This town has good people," he said. "They don't need trouble coming through their doors. Stay out of their shops, their bars, and their lives. If you come back for payback, you won't like what happens." His words were like stone, solid, unshakable. Steven added quietly, "The patience you burned tonight was the last of it. Next time, you won't get a warning." The bikers looked at each other. No one wanted to meet Chuck's eyes. Finally, two of them helped Razor Cane up, dragging him by the arms. Razor Cane groaned, holding his ribs, his face pale. The knife was gone. His boots scraped on the floor he used to think he owned. No one stopped them. No one helped them. When the door slammed shut behind them, the rusted chain was quiet for one long heartbeat. The silence felt thicker than the smoke in the air. Then it broke. The bartender slammed his hand on the bar and shouted, "Hell yes." His words lit the room like a spark in dry grass. The whole bar erupted. Chairs banged. Boots stomped. Hands clapped hard on tables. Men who had been too afraid to look at each other earlier now shouted and laughed like kids at a ball game. Some whistled. Some pounded their fists in the air. The rusted chain, once owned by fear, now roared with relief and respect. "It's Steven Seagal," one man shouted, shaking his head in amazement. "I can't believe it's really him." "And Chuck Norris," another yelled, grinning wide. "In the rusted chain of all places." A group of regulars hurried forward, not too close, but close enough to show their thanks. They shouted all at once. "You showed them what real strength looks like. Never seen anything like that in my life. You two are legends. I'll tell this story until the day I die." Steven didn't soak in the attention. He stood calm, his coat over his arm, a tiny smile on his lips. He nodded to the men politely. Chuck gave a quiet chuckle, shaking a few hands. He was steady and kind, but never boastful. For a while, The rusted chain wasn't a bar filled with fear. It was a room full of respect, where people remembered what it looked like when decency stood tall. When the cheers finally started to fade, Chuck tipped his head toward the door. "We best be going," he said softly. Steven nodded. Together, they stepped into the cold night. The cheers followed them all the way to the gravel parking lot. Even after the truck's taillights had vanished down the dark road, the folks inside the rusted chain kept talking. Their voices were full of awe, because they hadn't just seen a fight. They had seen a lesson. Real strength is not about yelling the loudest. It's not about scaring people. Real strength is when you stand still and steady while everything around you is wild and messy. It's about being patient until you cannot be patient anymore. And then when you must act, you act fairly, quickly, and in the right way. That night, nobody doubted what they had seen. They knew they had just watched two men who were very good at both things, being calm and acting strong. The road out of the town was empty. Only two sets of tire tracks were in the wet gravel. A cold wind was still rolling off the hills. The storm had not gone away. It had only stepped aside for a little while, like it knew something more important needed to pass first. Chuck's old truck rumbled along the back road. The engine made a low sound, a little like a man clearing his throat once in a while. It did not have to talk much. Inside the truck it was warm. The windows were a little foggy from the heat of their breath. They had been quiet since they left the rusty chain fence behind them. Steven sat in the passenger seat. His coat was folded on his lap. His hands were resting still. He had not said a word since they left. Chuck had not asked him to. With men like them, words came only when they were ready, never before. About 5 miles away from town, Chuck turned the truck onto a small gravel path. It was quiet there. A small hill looked down at the valley. The town lights below flickered like tired stars. Chuck put the truck in park. He leaned back in his seat. He looked through the windshield for a long time before saying anything. "Funny," Chuck said, "how places like that bar always feel bigger than they really are. When you are inside with all the noise and all the pride, it feels like the whole world is in there with you." Steven did not turn his head. He just nodded slowly. "Then you step outside," Chuck went on, "and it's just another little dot on the map." Steven said nothing. Chuck chuckled quietly, still holding the wheel. A loud dot though. At least tonight. They were quiet again. It was not an empty kind of quiet. It felt full. Like two old dogs sitting on a porch. They did not need to bark at the moon anymore. After a moment, Steven finally spoke. His voice was low. It did not sound tired, just worn from many years. "You ever think we'd still be doing this at our age?" Chuck smiled. "Not like this. No, not exactly. I thought maybe I'd be fishing more by now. What about you?" Steven looked down at his hands. Then he looked at the valley. "I thought I'd just disappear one day. You know, slip away quietly. Let the world forget me." Chuck turned to look at him. "You don't seem like the kind of man who disappears." Steven's smile was small, but it was there. "I didn't think I'd need to be reminded. Until tonight." They sat with that thought for a while. Chuck reached behind the seat. He pulled out a thermos. He poured some coffee into the lid and handed it to Steven. Steven took it. He nodded his thanks. He sipped slowly. The coffee was not hot anymore, but it was still good. "You handled yourself real clean back there," Chuck said. "You didn't throw a punch until you had to. You could have taken down that whole place if you wanted to." Steven shrugged a little. "I wasn't there to prove anything. I just wanted a quiet drink." Chuck nodded. "Funny thing about men like us. Even when we don't come looking for trouble, trouble comes looking for us. I think it's the silence. Makes people curious. Makes them nervous." Steven nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe they just don't believe a man can be calm unless he's hiding something." Chuck took a sip from the thermos and passed it back. The wind outside whistled through a fence post. "Have you ever missed it?" Steven asked. "The fighting, the spotlight, the cameras, all of it?" Chuck leaned back and thought for a moment. "Sometimes. Not the fame, but the purpose. When we were younger, people looked at what we did and saw something to believe in. Even if it was just a movie, it gave them an idea, how to be strong without being cruel." Steven's eyes narrowed like he was remembering something far away. These days, people think strength means shouting the loudest or hitting first. That's not strength, Chuck said. That's fear wearing big boots and making noise. Neither man spoke for a long time after that. Chuck started the truck again. They rode in silence. The hum of the engine was steady. As they reached the edge of town, Steven looked out the window at the dark streets. You think they'll remember what happened tonight? Chuck kept his eyes on the road. They'll remember the fight. But I hope they remember what happened before it too. The part where we gave them a choice, Steven said. Chuck nodded. That's the real power, giving them the choice to walk away and showing them what happens when they don't. The town faded behind them. The truck rolled on. Two old legends drove side by side. Not as actors. Not as fighters. But as men who still knew what mattered when the dust settled. The truck moved through the dark. Its headlights cut through the mist still hanging in the valley. For a long time, neither man spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was thoughtful, like both were remembering things they hadn't thought about in a long time. Steven finally spoke. Chuck, sometimes I wonder, all the years I showed patience, all the times I held back when I could have gone harder, was it worth it? Chuck kept his eyes on the road. Why wouldn't it be? Steven breathed out slowly. Because patience doesn't get applause. People don't cheer for the man who doesn't fight. They cheer for the swing, not the stillness. You saw their faces back there. They only got excited when bottles started breaking. Chuck nodded. That's true. People don't always notice silence, until it saves them. Steven's hand rested on his folded coat. I've spent a lot of years being the quiet one in the room. Sometimes it feels like it doesn't change anything. Chuck glanced at him. Steven, every man you kept from getting his nose broken, every kid who saw you stay calm instead of throwing fists, that's a change. You just don't always get to see it. The words stayed in the air. Steven thought about them, like he was holding a stone in his hand and feeling its weight. Do you ever get tired, Chuck? Tired of being the one people look at like you're made of iron? Chuck gave a low, dry laugh, but it wasn't unkind. Every day. Truth is, I'm just as breakable as anyone. But I don't show it. Not because I want to be a statue, but because people need to believe someone out there can't be moved. Steven looked out at the dark hills. And if one day we can't stand steady anymore? Then it'll be their turn, Chuck said. All we can do is show them how, while we're still here. They drove on quietly. The town lights were long gone. Only the hum of the engine and the whisper of the wind against the glass were left. After a while, Steven said softly, funny thing. I didn't need you in there tonight. Chuck smirked. I know. But they did. Steven nodded. Yeah, they needed to see that two old dogs still had teeth. But more than that, they needed to see that we'd rather not bite at all. Chuck grinned. Don't give me too much credit. I just kick faster than I talk. They both laughed quietly. It sounded like an old song they hadn't heard in years. The night went on. The storm finally broke apart. Stars began to shine through the clouds. There was peace in the air, the kind of peace that comes when two men know they've done the right thing, even if the world never writes their names in gold for it. Steven leaned back. Kindness doesn't mean weakness. Silence doesn't mean fear. It took me a long time to believe that. Chuck kept one hand firm on the wheel and the other resting on the seat. Then let's hope they believe it after tonight. That's all that matters. The truck rolled on into the dark. Two legends, side by side. Their words floated away into the night, like a promise that wouldn't be forgotten. And you know, as I think about what we just saw together, I realize this story wasn't really about a bar fight at all. It was about something bigger. Steven Seagal and Chuck Norris didn't show strength by how hard they could hit, though we saw they could hit hard when they needed to. They showed strength by how much they held back. They showed strength by giving patience to men who didn't deserve it. They showed it by staying calm when others tried to pull them into chaos. That's the lesson I'll remember. Real strength isn't about being the loudest or the toughest looking. It's about knowing you can act, but choosing to wait until you have no other choice. It's about showing that silence is not fear. It's about showing that kindness is not weakness. Think about that. How many times in life do people push us, make fun of us, or think we are weak. The easy thing to do is to get angry right away. But sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to stay calm, keep steady, and let your dignity do the talking. That night, the rusted chain bar learned that lesson the hard way. And maybe, just maybe, we can take a little piece of that lesson with us. Did you enjoy the story? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. If you had a great time, don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell so you're always in the loop for the next adventure. Thanks for joining me, and as always, stay curious, stay brave, and keep exploring.